The pie was hollow, but the motive was full of secrets. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. It's always amazing to see where you're all watching from. Drop a comment below and tell me your location. Reading your messages truly makes my day. Let's get into it. I'll admit it. When it started, I didn't smell murder in the air. Cinnamon, maybe, and a faint trace of desperation, but nothing I'd peg for foul play. We'd had worse walk through the door of the brownstone, sometimes dripping blood, sometimes tears. This one brought a pie, or what claimed to be one. It was around 11:20 in the morning, and I was finishing my second cup of coffee while listening to Nero Wolfe gripe about Fritz's latest experiment with Moroccan preserved lemons. The kitchen had become a war zone of citrus and passive aggression. Wolfe, seated in his oversized throne in the office, was deep into Botanica Atlantica, and had already declared the day a no-visitors zone. That declaration, like all of Wolfe's, was sacred, unless it wasn't. When the doorbell rang, I took my time answering. It was a woman, late 30s maybe, with red hair that had been pinned up in a hurry and a cardboard pastry box clutched under one arm. She had that look, polished but fraying at the edges, like she'd pressed her blouse but forgotten to button the second collar snap. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," she said, "but I've read Mr. Wolfe takes unusual cases." I held the door just wide enough to see the brand on the pastry box, Lodestar Confections, a high-end bakery downtown. If she was trying to bribe her way into Wolfe's attention, she wasn't using cheap ammunition. "He does," I said, "but usually after lunch and never without an appointment. Please, I won't take more than a minute. I think someone's sabotaging my bakery, and I have proof." She lifted the box like it was an exhibit in a trial. That made me arch. A brow. Not many cases begin with flour and crust. I considered my options. Wolfe hated mystery in the kitchen, but he hated the unknown more. And if she was quick, maybe we'd both be spared a lecture. Name? Genevieve Pike. I opened the door and waved her in. "Follow me, slowly. Don't step on the runner." She nodded and obeyed, heels muted on the parquet as I led her into the office. Wolfe didn't look up. "Archie, what did I say about interruptions? You said you'd throw your drink at me if I brought in another actor selling a screenplay." This one brought pie. That got his attention. His eyes lifted briefly, assessing the box as if it might contain a ticking bomb. "This is Miss Genevieve Pike," I said. "She thinks someone's sabotaging her bakery, and she brought exhibit." And Miss Pike placed the box gently on Wolfe's desk and opened it. Inside was a perfectly golden pie crust, edges fluted, lattice braided, but empty. No filling, just a hollow buttery shell. Wolfe's brows twitched. Not a frown, not surprise. Just a faint, seismic shift in his expression that meant she had bought herself 60 seconds of his curiosity. "Explain," he said. Genevieve folded her hands together like she was steeling herself. "I co-own Lodestar Bakery. For the past 3 weeks, something's been going wrong with our signature pies. Customers complain of missing fillings, underbaked bottoms, or sudden changes in taste. But no one in the kitchen admits to doing anything differently. This morning we delivered a dozen pies for a corporate catering order, only to find 6 of them were like this. Just crust, no filling." "Clerical error," Wolfe muttered. "A mistake." "No," she said, "and I'll give her credit." Her voice didn't waver. "It's not a mistake. It's the 5th time. Something is being tampered with, deliberately, from the inside, and I think it's personal. We're losing orders. Our reputation is at stake, and worse, our investors are sniffing around. One of them already wants to pull out." Wolfe exhaled heavily. "Sabotage. In a commercial kitchen. Pies with no filling. Miss Pike, this is not—" "I'll pay your full fee," she interrupted. "And I won't make a public scene. I just need your discretion and your precision. I think someone is trying to destroy me, not just my business, that hung in the air like burnt caramel. Wolfe's gaze narrowed slightly. He reached for the pie box and examined the crust. Not tasted, examined, like a rare specimen under glass. "Who has access to your kitchen?" he asked. "Myself. My co-owner, Claire Deming, 2 bakers, 1 junior prep, and an intern. That's it." Wolfe leaned back. "And what connection do they have to you, aside from the business?" Genevieve hesitated. "Claire is an old friend from pastry school. The others are staff, except the intern. That's Claire's niece." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Humph. Archie." "Yes, sir?" "Take Miss Pike's address and business details. Visit the bakery, speak with the staff, taste nothing. I will consider whether this merits further engagement." Genevieve stiffened. "But that is all," Wolfe said firmly. "If you wish to retain me, you will do so on my terms." Genevieve looked at me. I gave her a half shrug and offered to walk her out. As she left, I jotted down the details. Lodestar Bakery, Upper West Side, a compact crew, and a crusty mystery. I came back into the office to find Wolfe with his eyes closed, muttering about crimes against Flour. "You buying her story?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said. "But I'm interested in who believes it enough to bake sabotage into a dessert, and more importantly, why." He reached for the phone and buzzed Fritz. "Have we any apple brandy left?" I didn't have to ask. The wheels were already turning. And when Wolfe asks for apple brandy before lunch, it means dessert has just become deadly serious. Wolfe didn't say another word about pies or anything else for the next half hour. I left him in the office to his muttering and rumbling, grabbed my notebook, and made for Lodestar Bakery with nothing but Miss Pike's address, a mental note to avoid all samples, and the kind of simmering curiosity that usually means trouble. Is baking on low heat. It was a sleek corner spot on West 87th, the kind of place that smelled like warm vanilla and ambition. A cheerful gold-lettered sign in the window read, "Lodestar," with a stylized pastry star between the O and the D. Inside it was all white tile, exposed beams, and glass cases filled with glossy pastries that looked like they were sculpted by tiny French architects. A bell jingled over my head when I pushed open the door. The redhead behind the register wasn't Genevieve Pike. This one was taller, darker, with sharp cheekbones, and the kind of makeup that says, "I woke up like this," and "I dare you to prove otherwise." She glanced up from the screen. "Help you?" "Maybe," I said. "I'm here to speak with Miss Pike." She gave me the kind of smile you usually see on menus next to unsweetened espresso. "She's in the kitchen. And you are?" "Archie Goodwin. I'm a private investigator working with Mr. Nero Wolfe." The smile vanished like sugar in hot water. She hit a button and spoke into an intercom. "Jen, you've got company, Wolfe's man." Genevieve appeared through the swinging door in the back, her apron dusted with flour and her hair now stuffed under a navy bandana. She wiped her hands on a towel and motioned me in. "I didn't expect you so soon." "Wolfe's interested," I said. "Which means I'm interested. You said 5 incidents. Start walking me through them." She led me through the prep area, which was as clean and organized as a surgeon's theater. There were 2 ovens humming, a mixer the size of a washing machine, and a cooling rack with a few steaming apple galettes that I made a note not to touch. Genevieve pointed to a small break-room table where we could sit. "It started 3 weeks ago. Our lemon meringue pies came out with salt instead of sugar. I thought it was a mix-up. Fritz, our night baker, swore he measured correctly. A few days later, a batch of cherry hand pies were baked without cherries. Just crust and a few dried stems." "Same baker." "No, that was Pilar, our morning shift. She said she remembered placing the filling, swears she saw it on the tray. But when they came out of the oven, empty." I jotted that down. "And the others?" "One batch had a strange metallic aftertaste. Turned out someone had swapped out the almond extract for something labeled the same, but it was artificial and rancid. And then there was this morning. The 6 hollow pies," she nodded. We always double-check orders before delivery. But Claire, my partner, was the one who boxed them up today. Said they looked fine, but when the client opened them, just shell, we lost the order and Claire's furious. I'm treating it like sabotage instead of incompetence. Where is Claire now? In her office, probably rewriting our investor pitch. She thinks I'm overreacting. I asked to see the kitchen layout. She obliged, showing me the ingredient station, the spice rack, the cold storage, the prep surfaces, each clearly labeled and spotless. Either they kept things tight, or they had just cleaned in a panic. Short, stocky man in his 50s walked past us with a tray of Danishes. He nodded politely, but didn't pause. Fritz? I asked. Genevieve nodded. He's been here the longest. 4 years. German-trained, stubborn as a bread brick, but never had a complaint. Where's Pilar? Out sick. Flu. Convenient, I muttered. Genevieve bristled. She called at 6 a.m. sounding like a corpse. Believe me, I don't think she's faking it. Another figure emerged from the pantry, a girl no older than 21 with a nose ring and dyed blue streaks in her ponytail. She froze when she saw me. That's Lacey, Genevieve said. Claire's niece, our intern. Lacey gave a sheepish half-wave. I didn't do anything. I raised an eyebrow. That's usually not the first thing innocent people say. She shrugged. You're the detective, right? I just do what they tell me. Mostly wash dishes and fill ramekins. And fill pies. She snorted. They don't let me touch the important stuff. I asked to help with crusts once and Claire nearly bit my head off. I filed that away. Protective boss, untrained intern, missing fillings. The ingredients for a problem were starting to rise. Do you have a list of who was on duty each time something went wrong? I asked Genevieve. I do. In the office. She led me down a narrow hallway to a small back office where a clipboard hung on the wall. I snapped a photo of the schedules. One thing stood out right away. Claire Deming had been present every single time, sometimes on prep, sometimes overseeing packaging, but always there. I was about to point it out when the woman herself appeared in the doorway. If Genevieve was soft-spoken panic, Claire was simmering command. Same age, brunette bob, slate-grey eyes like a lawyer's pen tip. She didn't offer a hand. I hear you're investigating dessert drama, she said coolly. Wolfe's words were slightly more refined, I said. But sure. I don't appreciate my staff being interrogated, and I don't appreciate sabotage being treated like a misfired timer, I replied. You were in charge of boxing today's order. I was. They looked fine. I didn't cut them open. Why not? Because we don't slice into custom pies before delivering them. It's standard. Even after 4 incidents, she hesitated. I didn't think this would keep happening. I leaned against the filing cabinet. But it has kept happening. And always under your watch. Her eyes flared for a second. Are you implying? I'm implying nothing. Yet. I thanked them both for their time, promised Wolfe would be in touch and made for the exit. As I passed the front counter again, I saw Lacey watching me like I was about to declare her guilty on sight. Fritz was kneading dough in rhythmic silence. Genevieve had already retreated to the kitchen. Claire stayed in the doorway, arms crossed. Watching me leave, when I stepped outside, I called Wolfe. Well, he demanded. I've got 5 suspects, I said. 1 sick, 1 sullen, 1 too sweet, and 1 who's got motive written all over her business casual blouse. Meaning, Claire Deming. She had opportunity each time. She's running. Point on investor relations. And she doesn't think the sabotage is real. Phoy, Wolfe muttered. Either it is real and she's guilty, or it is false and Miss Pike is mad. We shall determine which, he paused. And Archie. Yes, sir? Bring back one of those empty pies. I want to examine it further. You planning to fill it with something yourself? I plan, he said coldly, to fill it with truth. He hung up. Back at the brownstone, I could already feel it. The faint shift in air pressure, the hum of interest. Wolfe's mental wheels grinding beneath his mountainous calm. The pie with no filling had done what few things could. It had disturbed his appetite, and worse, his order. And that meant someone was about to get served a dish they weren't expecting. I walked into the brownstone at just past 3, with the offending item boxed neatly in a bakery-branded carrier bag, which made me feel like I was bringing home something that belonged in Fritz's kitchen instead of on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe, predictably, had not moved a muscle since I left, still rooted in his chair like a permanent botanical fixture. His gaze flicked to the bag in my hand with a blend of curiosity and disdain. "You brought one," he said. "Excellent. Place it here." I set the box down on the edge of his desk like it might explode. "Before you launch into a monologue about culinary crimes against nature," I said, "you should know that sabotage isn't just a possibility. It's practically frosted on. The window's over there. The staff is twitchy, the co-owner is hostile, and the intern's favorite phrase is, 'I didn't do anything.' Oh, and Claire Deming. She's got motive, opportunity, and a personality that would curdle crème anglaise." Wolfe made a noise that might have passed for interest if you were fluent in Wolfian grunts. He opened the box slowly, peering in like a suspicious coroner. He lifted the lid, stared at the empty crust, then closed the box again with a fastidious flick of his fingers. "I want it examined," he said. "Microscopically, Fritz." Fritz entered on cue, summoned by some silent culinary disturbance in the air. "Yes, Mr. Wolfe? This crust. I want you to analyze it, identify any alterations in fat content, baking temperature, and if any ingredients. Deviate from standard ratio. Do not taste it, dissect it." Fritz nodded and took the box with something close to reverence, possibly grief. Wolfe laced his fingers. "Now, the staff." I gave him the breakdown, starting with Genevieve, who seemed earnest and genuinely anxious to root out the mole in her flour bin. Then Fritz, the bakery's own, who by all appearances had no energy to spare for sabotage, and Pilar out with what Genevieve swore was a legitimate flu. "Lacey, the intern," I said, "is green, slightly terrified, and smart enough not to. Touch the filling station. Her aunt is Claire, which makes things interesting. Claire is the only one who had access every single time something went wrong, and she's hostile enough to turn caramel to glass." "Saboteurs," Wolfe murmured, "do not sabotage for amusement. They sabotage for revenge, prevention, or gain. Which of these applies? That's the thing. Claire stands to gain if the bakery tanks. Maybe she wants to exit with her own brand. Maybe she's pushing Genevieve out to take over fully. Or maybe there's an investor angle we haven't spotted yet. Then we must determine," Wolfe said, "whether her motive aligns with malice or mere negligence." He leaned back. "You will return. Ask more pointed questions. Take Saul Panzer with you." I frowned. "Saul?" "If someone is lying, Saul will know. And I suspect Miss Deming's poise masks far more than misdelivered pies." I nodded. "And what should I be while Saul plays bloodhound?" "A thorn," Wolfe said, subtle and persistent. It was after 5 when Saul and I reached Lodestar. The shop was closing early. Genevieve's doing, no doubt, worried about bad press, or more deliveries gone wrong. She met us at the door, relieved and a little wired. "You're back," she said. "Did Mr. Wolfe find anything?" "He's dissecting your pie like it insulted his orchid collection. Meanwhile, we have questions." Saul gave her a small nod, and followed us into the back. Genevieve introduced him quickly, then excused herself to fetch Claire, leaving us alone with the prep tables and the faint scent of cooling pastry. "So," I said, "what's your bet?" Saul tapped the countertop. "If Claire's the one, she's careful. But if she's angry, I'll see it. This kind of sabotage, it's not just business. It's personal. No one replaces sugar with salt unless they want someone humiliated." Claire entered 5 minutes later, not thrilled to find 2 detectives instead of 1. She gave Saul a flat once-over and crossed her arms. "You again." "Me," I said. And my associate, Mr. Panzer. We're here for clarity." She snorted. "You think two of you will find what one couldn't?" "No," Saul said mildly, "but we figured it's only fair. 2 bakers, 2 detectives." Claire stiffened. Saul had this way of laying out bait with honey and razor wire. "Mr. Deming," he said, "let me ask you something plain. Do you believe your partner is mentally sound?" Claire blinked. "Excuse me. You said before this wasn't sabotage, that it's probably human error. But 5 incidents? You're still defending coincidence, which either means you don't trust her judgment or you're hiding something." Her jaw tensed. "I'm not hiding anything." "Then who is?" Saul asked, stepping in a little closer, not threatening, but undeniable. She glanced over at me, then back to Saul. "Look, I don't think Genevieve is unstable, but she's under pressure. She's obsessed with perfecting every detail. I think she's making mistakes and looking for someone to blame." "Funny," I said, "because she says the same about you, minus the mistakes." Claire's laugh was short. "I helped her start this place. I've put in just as much sweat as she has, but lately she second-guesses everything I do. Won't even let me talk to investors without rehearsing." "And the pies?" Saul asked. "What about the pies? I packed that box myself. I remember seeing the filling. I didn't hallucinate it. If it vanished, someone tampered with it after it left my hands." "Who would do that?" I asked. "Genevieve," she said flatly. "To pin it on me." I leaned back. "That's a big accusation. I know what it sounds like, but maybe she wants to force me out. Or make it look like she's the victim so she gets sympathy and leverage." "Would she go that far?" Saul asked. Claire didn't answer. That was enough for me. Back in the cab, I gave Saul a sideways look. "So, your take?" "She's lying." Saul said, "About what, I don't know, but she saw something she's not admitting to." We arrived at the brownstone just after 7. Wolfe was still at his desk, Fritz standing beside him, a notepad in hand. "Well?" Wolfe demanded. I gave him the short version. Claire's deflections, Genevieve's concern, and Saul's verdict. Wolfe nodded toward Fritz. "The crust," he said, "was tampered with post-bake. It was opened and resealed, sloppily, as if someone removed the filling after baking." I frowned. "Why would anyone—" "To create the illusion of sabotage," Wolfe said. "That stopped me cold." "So not sabotage?" "Oh, no," Wolfe said. "Sabotage indeed, but not by a saboteur, by a dramatist. Someone creating a trail of destruction not for gain but to build a narrative. To frame someone, perhaps Claire, perhaps Genevieve, perhaps another entirely." He stood, a rare move, and stepped toward the globe. "I want everyone here. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. I blinked. "Everyone?" "Miss Pike, Miss Deming, Lacey, Fritz, Pilar, if she's not genuinely dying. I want them in this office. We will have our pie, gentlemen, and we will find its missing filling." He turned back and fixed me with a look. "Arrange it, Archie. Nicely, if possible. Forcefully, if not." As I went to the phone, I thought about Claire's eyes, Genevieve's nerves, and a crust so perfectly empty it had become a message. Wolfe wasn't just chewing on a case. He was savoring it. And when Wolfe savors something, someone ends up being devoured. At precisely 9:58 the next morning, I stood in the front hall of the brownstone doing my best impersonation of a maitre d' for a very exclusive brunch party, where the main course would be tension. The buzzer had been working overtime since 9:30. One by one, the guests arrived like players assembling on a particularly awkward game board. Genevieve Pike was the first to show. She wore a navy blazer over a cream blouse, the kind of outfit that said, "I'd like to appear in control while internally unraveling." I escorted her to the front room, offered her a chair she didn't take, and left her nervously studying Wolfe's bookshelf as if the solution to her problems were tucked between The Gastronomic Regrets of Montpellier and rare hybrid Phalaenopsis. Next came Claire Deming, punctual and polished in a pinstripe dress, a portfolio tucked under her arm like she planned to deliver a closing argument, not answer a summons. She didn't bother masking her annoyance when I told her Wolfe would see everyone at once, not individually. "You're herding us like suspects," she muttered. I grinned. "That's because you are. It's part of the charm." By 10:02 we had the full ensemble. Lacey, the intern, looking freshly scrubbed and less defiant than before. Fritz in his bakery whites, face grim. And finally Pilar, wrapped in a scarf and coughing like her lungs were auditioning for a tragedy. I ushered them all into the office where Wolfe sat behind his desk, mountainous and motionless, fingertips pressed together as if bracing for impact. Saul Panzer stood to the side, silent and sharp-eyed. Wolfe waited until the room had settled into a nervous hush. Then he began. "Miss Pike," he said, his voice as smooth and slow as aged port, "has retained me to investigate a series of culinary anomalies which she believes constitute sabotage, a pie with no filling, a tart with no flavor, a reputation with no future. You are all here because you had access and motive, whether conscious or not, to disrupt the operation of Lodestar Bakery. I intend to determine who is responsible." Claire let out a sharp breath. "With all due respect, Mr. Wolfe, this is absurd. You're turning a handful of mistakes into a conspiracy." "That remains to be seen," Wolfe replied. "But I warn you, deception will only prolong your discomfort." He turned to me. "Archie, begin." I nodded. "Let's talk about the crust." Genevieve glanced at me, confused. Fritz blinked. Claire frowned. "The crust of the pie that was sent to the corporate client," I continued. "The one that was empty. Wolfe had it analyzed. Turns out it had been tampered with after baking. Someone scooped out the filling and patched the crust to make it look undisturbed." Lacey gasped. Pilar coughed louder. "That's not possible," Claire said. "You'd see it." "You do," I said. "If you're looking, the edges are too smooth." A spatula was used. It was careful work, but not bakery-level perfection. Wolfe adjusted slightly in his chair. That was his version of an exclamation point. "Miss Deming," he said, "you stated that you packed the pies and saw them filled. Do you now understand why?" Claire hesitated. "Because someone tampered with them afterward." "Correct." "Which means either someone did so during transport, which would imply an external actor, a courier or client, or someone within the bakery did it just before they were boxed." "That's ridiculous," Genevieve said wide-eyed. "Who would permit me?" Wolfe's voice cut through her like a paring knife. "There are three likely motives for this sort of sabotage. 1, to undermine Miss Pike's authority and imply incompetence. 2, to harm the bakery's reputation in order to devalue its worth. Or 3, to create a false narrative of sabotage in order to frame someone else." He let the silence stretch, tasting it. "Now," he said, "let us consider who gains from each." Fritz cleared his throat. "I gain nothing from this," he said, his voice low. "I have been loyal to that kitchen." "No one's accusing you, Fritz," Genevieve said. "No," Wolfe said, "but he could be covering for someone. For example, Pilar." She started, coughing again. "Excuse me? You were absent the day the box was delivered, but you were present during a previous incident, the salted lemon meringue." "I measured the sugar," Pilar snapped. "I swear I didn't know until Genevieve tasted it herself." "Did anyone else have access to your station that day?" She looked at Claire. "She passed behind me once, that's it." "I was retrieving a tray," Claire said coldly, "not seasoning the pies." "Miss Deming," Wolfe said, "you were present during every single incident. That is undisputed. Do you deny it?" "No, I don't deny it. I've been hands-on since day one." Wolfe nodded. "You argued yesterday that Miss Pike may be creating the sabotage herself. I didn't say she was. I said it's possible. And yet, Wolfe said, you were the one who had the greatest access and the most to gain if the bakery were to struggle. Claire tensed. That's absurd. On the contrary, you've been in contact with investors, you control delivery procedures, and you were the one who discouraged Miss Pike from pursuing an investigation. Genevieve turned to her. Is that true? You told me to drop it because it would look paranoid. You said it was just a bad week. Claire's eyes flashed. Because dragging in a detective would make us look unstable to our clients. Enough, Wolfe said. We are circling the obvious. He turned to Lacey. Miss Lacey, your access was limited. You are new, and your aunt was your guardian at the bakery, yet you have a reason to protect her. Have you done so by omitting or altering the truth? Lacey looked like she wanted to crawl under the couch. I didn't lie, but, I prompted. I saw her, Claire, the morning of the delivery. She checked one of the pies before it went in the box. She lifted the crust flap. I asked why, and she told me to mind my business. Genevieve stiffened. Claire's jaw dropped. That's not true. I never... Miss Deming, Wolfe said, you had the opportunity to check the pies and fix the sabotage, but you let them go. I didn't sabotage anything, Claire cried. Why would I destroy my own business? Because, Wolfe said, you were being forced out. That dropped the room into stunned silence. Genevieve blinked. What are you talking about? She intended to sell her share, Wolfe said, but discovered it wasn't possible without your signature. So she created a crisis, sabotaged your reputation, hoping you'd cave and buy her out or step down. You had refused an offer from one of the investors Claire wanted to work with exclusively. She needed control. Claire looked like she'd been hit with a rolling pin. That's insane, she said. It's elegant, Wolfe said, except for the crust. That was crude. Genevieve stood. Is that true, Claire? Claire opened her mouth, closed it. Her shoulders fell. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Just a few incidents, just enough to push you into backing off. You let us take the fall, Fritz said, his voice low. I was trying to protect the business, she said. We had a chance at serious expansion. That investor, Wolfe interrupted, will be informed. As will your clients. Genevieve looked shattered. Claire, why didn't you just talk to me? Wolfe waved a hand. Because, Miss Pike, betrayal speaks in flower and silence far more fluently than honesty. And that, as they say, was the final fold in the dough. I escorted them all out, some fuming, some stunned, some just glad it was over. Wolfe remained in his chair, unmoving, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the walls. You enjoyed that, I said. I endured it, he replied. Fritz appeared. We'll have duck tonight with proper pastry, no treachery in the crust. Fritz bowed and left, and Wolfe, eyes closed, whispered as if to himself, There are few things more distasteful than a lie in a pie. I grinned. And that, I assume, is your idea of dessert. After the office cleared out, and the echo of outrage finally died in the walls, Wolfe did what he always did after dropping the curtain on a confession. He reclined deeper in his chair, breathed through his nose like a man reviewing a fine wine, and withdrew inward like a snail into its shell, albeit one clad in 320 pounds of arrogance and intellect. For my part, I tidied the battlefield, refilled the bourbon decanter just in case, and sat at my desk, flipping through the shorthand notes I'd made during the interrogation. There were always stray threads, little burrs of doubt that stuck even after. Wolfe had made his pronouncement, and the crowd had either gasped or groaned, and this time one such burr itched in the back of my mind like a splinter under the nail. I gave it 5 minutes, then 10. Finally I said, That was pretty clean. Wolfe opened one eye. Pfui, if you wish to fawn, do it with less syrup. I'm not fawning, I'm observing. Then observe silently. I waited 2 beats. But something's still off. His eye opened again. Explain. Claire folds, confesses, and gives a textbook motive, I said, gesturing at my notes. Control of the business, a strategic exit, pressure from an investor. It all fits. But if she wanted to tank Genevieve's confidence, why make the sabotage so subtle? The salt in the meringue, the missing cherries, an empty pie. She was trying to discredit her partner, right? Why not make it obvious? Burnt pies, spoiled cream, real disasters. Wolfe frowned slightly, but it counted. A fair point. And the intern, I added. Lacey. She comes off harmless, but she waited until yesterday to mention the crust flap incident. That's not just forgetfulness, that's convenience. Wolfe sighed. You believe Miss Deming confessed to a crime she did not fully commit? I think she was involved. But I think someone helped her, or let her take, the blame. That got him to sit forward an inch. For Wolfe, that's a gesture of alarm. Who? I leaned back and let the name sit in my mouth for a moment before saying it. Genevieve. He blinked once. You are proposing that the client, our client, engineered her own sabotage? Not all of it, just the last one, the empty pie. Wolfe didn't move, but I could see it happening. The gears, the levers, the frictionless machine of deduction purring to life. He nodded to himself once. Go on. She wanted Claire out. Maybe she couldn't prove Claire was already sabotaging her. Maybe she suspected her and needed to tip Wolfe's scales toward action. So she faked the last one. Hollow pie, called it sabotage, delivered it herself. Except she claimed Claire packed it. And Claire did, filled and boxed it. But the crust was altered afterward, remember? Carefully peeled, then patched. Wolfe raised a hand. And how would Miss Pike gain access after boxing? I pointed to my notebook. She did the delivery. He was quiet for a moment. Then, bring Miss Pike. Alone. Now. I made the call. She was hesitant, of course, but when I added that Wolfe wanted a private clarification before writing his final report, she agreed. Flattery still works, even when the ink's drying on the confession. She arrived in under 40 minutes, wearing the same navy blazer and looking a shade less confident than before. I led her in and watched Wolfe give her the once-over with the indifference of a chess player, surveying a pawn that had been hiding its true shape. Miss Pike, he said without preamble, I am revising my conclusion. Her mouth tightened. What do you mean? Miss Deming's confession, Wolfe said, was sincere but not complete. She orchestrated the first incidents, yes, she intended to destabilize your position, but the final pie, the hollow pie that prompted your contact with me was not her work, it was yours, she flinched. That's not true. It is, Wolfe said, unfazed. You had motive. You suspected her but lacked proof. You needed something bold enough to justify hiring me, yet subtle enough to push her to collapse under pressure. You removed the filling after boxing, delivered the box yourself, then presented the pie as the final outrage. That's insane, she said, but her voice cracked. No, Wolfe said, it is precise. You did not intend to destroy the business, only to reveal her as a liability. But sabotage, even as bait, is still deception, and deception, Miss Pike, always leaves a scent. She stood there, motionless, face pale. I watched her try to marshal, a denial, something indignant or clever. But what came out instead was something soft. I didn't think it would go that far. Wolfe inclined his head, just slightly. It did. I thought, if I could just get her to slip, admit something, lose control, then I could confront her cleanly. You chose theatre, Wolfe said, a pastry drama. You invited me to be the audience, and I do not care for farce. She sank into the chair without waiting for permission. I'm not a liar, she said, not looking at either of us. No, Wolfe said, but you are a manipulator. You used me to clean your kitchen. I stepped in. Claire still committed sabotage. She admitted it. That doesn't change. It doesn't, Wolfe agreed. But neither does Miss Pike's performance. Genevieve looked up. What happens now? You are free, Wolfe said. I do not prosecute. I expose. She gave a tiny nod. Will you tell Claire? Wolfe leaned back. That is your decision, but should she ask, I will not lie. I walked her out myself. She didn't say much, just a quiet thank you, which I didn't have the heart to tell her was undeserved. Back in the office, Wolfe was already reaching for the book of orchids, signaling the case had been retired from his mind. So, I said. What now? Dinner, he said. Duck à l'orange with a proper tart to finish? Nothing flaky, nothing hollow. And that was that. No fanfare, no triumph. Just another case put to bed by the man who solved crimes like he pruned roses, delicately, methodically, and with just enough sting to make the lesson stick. Dinner that evening was duck à l'orange, as promised, with Fritz's delicate hand balancing the citrus just shy of sharpness, and a tart that redeemed every disgrace ever committed in the name of pastry. Wolfe, as always, was silent through the meal, a tradition built on the unshakable belief that nothing ruins, a sauce reduction like unnecessary speech. I honored the ritual with a little less reverence, scarfed the tart like I hadn't just spent the day elbows deep in lies, and waited for the inevitable post-meal declaration. It came after he'd returned to his chair, his glass of Armagnac, held loosely like a priest's censer. He was quiet for a minute, the fire from the grate brushing gold across the lower half of his face. I detest being used, he said. I gave a low whistle. She did play you. She underestimated me, he said, which is worse. To be fair, you cracked her and Claire both. 2 confessions, 1 pie, not a bad yield, he grunted. I prefer a single clean cut. This case, he gestured vaguely, was layered, crumbling, like a millefeuille left too long in the air. You're really not over it. No, I could have left it there, but something still gnawed at me. Wolfe had solved it. 2 perpetrators, 2 motives, 1 crime nested inside another like a cursed culinary doll, but there was a sense of residue, a lingering bitterness, and not the kind that could be blamed on overcooked zest. You think we're done? I asked. He didn't answer, which told me he wasn't sure. It was late when the call came. I had just changed into pajamas. Yes, I wear pajamas, don't judge, and was contemplating whether I could sneak one of Fritz's tucked-away pear galettes from the second fridge. The phone rang twice. I picked it up on instinct. Goodwin. Archie, it's Genevieve. Her voice was taut, like it had been pulled thin by something heavier than guilt. I didn't like it, calling to apologize or to bake us another red. Herring, I need to talk. In person, now. I hesitated. It's past 11. Then come fast. Click. I stared at the receiver. Then I went back into the office, where Wolfe, unsurprisingly, had not budged an inch from his chair. He raised a brow when he saw me redressed and putting on my coat. She called. Genevieve wants a meeting, urgent, sounded shaken. Alone? Didn't say. Go, he said. Call if necessary. If it's another pie, don't bring it back. I grabbed my coat, hat, and recorder, because if Wolfe had taught me anything, it was that last-minute visits rarely led to bedtime stories with warm milk. They usually involved the metaphorical kind, spilled secrets, curdled motives. Lodestar was dark, but a single light burned in the back kitchen. I knocked on the glass pane of the front door until I saw her appear, unlock it, and wave me in. She looked worse than before, eyes rimmed red, one of her sleeves stained with something that could have been fruit or something grimmer. I'm sorry, she said without pleasantries. I didn't come for an apology. What's going on? She walked me through the dark shop to the back, A pot of coffee bubbled on the burner, untouched. She didn't offer any, just pointed to a folded slip of paper on the prep counter. It was taped to the fridge when I got here. I picked it up. One sentence, written in small, careful letters. Next time the filling will be blood. I exhaled. When did you find it? 10 minutes before I called. I came in early. Couldn't sleep. Did you touch anything else? No, just unlocked the front and came straight to the back. The alarm was off, same as always. Anyone else have keys? She nodded. Claire, Fritz, Pilar, me, that's it. What about Lacey? She never had one, not officially. But I think Claire gave her a copy once when she needed deliveries done early. I folded the note and slipped it into an envelope from the desk drawer. I didn't like the feel of it. The language was too theatrical, too on the nose. It sounded like a threat made by someone trying hard to sound like they meant it. Did you call the police? She shook her head. I called you first. I didn't want press sniffing around, not again. Claire? She's not answering. Did she know you'd be here tonight? No. I told her I was going home to rest. Something about her posture was beginning to bug me. Not fear, exactly. Genevieve didn't seem panicked, but more like she was exhausted and not from lack of sleep. I think I know who wrote it, she said quietly. That got my attention. Yeah? I think it was Lacey. I blinked. Why? She's been distant, resentful. She asked me last week if I'd ever consider giving her a full-time position. I told her I couldn't. Not with the state the business is in. She looked cold, shut down. And now she's threatening you? I don't know, she said. But Claire spoiled her, treated her like she was untouchable. And after everything that happened, Claire's name is mud. Lacey's internship ends next week. No job, no future, maybe no loyalty. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The pattern was forming in my head, like a dust print lifting off a surface. Sabotage, framing, fake. Sabotage, genuine threat. Too many cooks, sure. But someone else had still been in the kitchen all along. I told her I'd take the note to Wolfe and that we'd be in touch. She thanked me, but not like she meant it. Just like she was grateful to have done something. It didn't ease her shoulders. The time I stepped into the brownstone again, dawn was peeking at the horizon. Wolfe was still awake, his light visible through the stained glass of the dining room. He never slept well when threads were left hanging. I handed him the note without a word. He read it, frowned, then read it again. This is clumsy, he said. Too clumsy? No, just enough to seem real. Which makes it dangerous, I told. Him about Genevieve's suspicion, about Lacey. Wolfe shook his head. She is a symptom, not the disease. She may have written it, yes, but the design belongs to someone else. Claire again? No, Claire is exhausted. She has played her part. This is someone new, or rather someone who has remained unnoticed. I felt it too, that itch again. Fritz? I asked. Pilar? Wolfe shook his head. Lacey, he said, was the tool. The message is hers, but the motive? No. He looked up at me. We've missed something. The fire in the grate had gone out. The case, we thought, had cooled, but it was still smouldering. And someone, somewhere, was stoking the embers. At 7:45 a.m., with my eyelids barely cooperating and my third cup of coffee in hand, I sat across from Wolfe as he stared at the threat note again, eyes narrowed like it personally insulted his intelligence. The light outside the office windows was still that early grey, the kind that makes everything look like it's been dusted in chalk. Fritz hadn't yet brought breakfast, which put Wolfe in a perilous mood, but even hunger wasn't outweighing his fixation on the sentence scrawled in tight black ink. Next time the filling will be blood. It's amateurish, he said for the third time, which is precisely why it cannot be dismissed. I'm not dismissing it, I said. I'm just saying if someone wanted to scare Genevieve, they could have done more than leave a glorified fortune cookie threat taped to a refrigerator. Not scare, Wolfe murmured. Control. That got me. I sat forward. You think it's leverage? I think, he said slowly, that someone is playing a longer game than either Miss Pike or Miss Deming imagined. And they are using the bakery and its instability as the board. I'd heard Wolfe go metaphysical before. It usually meant we were getting close to something, or about to tumble head first into a second twist. You still think it wasn't? Lacey? I believe Miss Lacey wrote the note, Wolfe said, but she did not conceive it. It bears none of the linguistic sloppiness I would expect from her previous speech. She's not that theatrical, and more importantly, she lacks the intent. This threat is performative, which means someone gave her the lines. I rubbed my temples. So, we've got a ghostwriter with a taste for melodrama and a knack for staying out of the light. Precisely. Any thoughts on who? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the phone and jabbed the switch. Fritz, a light breakfast, please, no citrus. I made a mental note. Wolfe was thinking harder than usual, and orange segments weren't invited. I need you to speak with Pilar, he said after hanging up. Ask her about her schedule, especially the days leading up to the most recent incident. Cross-reference every shift change, every delivery reroute, anything she was alone for. Pay close attention to what she avoids, not what she says. You think she's behind this? I think she's the only one we haven't truly examined. By 9 I was back at Lodestar, this time armed with a fresh notepad and a headache shaped like too many breadcrumbs on too many trails. Pilar was in the kitchen, setting a tray of scones in the warmer, her scarf tucked up under her chin like she was still fending off that flu. She looked surprised to see me, tired but not hostile. I told everything I know already, she said, brushing flour from her palms. Yeah, I said, but this time, it's not about what you know, it's about where you were. She frowned. I don't follow. Your shifts, before the hollow pie, before the salt switch, before the note. I need to know who you worked with, when, and whether you were alone at any point. She hesitated, then led me to the back office where the shift schedules were pinned up like a butcher's catalogue. We went over them together, me pointing, her answering, both of us fending off the sense that something bigger was lurking just off the page. She had, as Wolfe suspected, been present during several of the key incidents. Not all, but enough to make it curious. You ever work alone? I asked. Sometimes early mornings. Delivery prep. Who had access to ingredients? Then? Just me. Or sometimes Fritz if he came in early. And what about the key? Did you ever loan yours out? She looked away. Once. To who? She hesitated. Claire. I blinked. Claire. She said she needed to drop something off after hours. I didn't ask questions. I thought she was the boss. I stared at her. When was this? 2 weeks ago. The night before the cherry pies came out empty. There it was. I made a note, thanked her, and stepped back into the sunlight, feeling like someone had finally opened a kitchen window and let in some air. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the update. He listened in silence, fingers steepled, while Fritz served poached eggs with brioche toast and a side of thinly sliced radishes, which Wolfe ignored entirely. Claire had a key she didn't disclose, I finished. Pilar gave it to her. That puts her alone in the bakery the night before one of the early incidents. We assumed she only had opportunity during normal hours. Wolfe nodded. Which means she initiated the pattern of sabotage with more cunning than we credited her for. But it doesn't explain the note. No, he agreed. That, I believe, was someone else's innovation, designed to weaponize the fear already in motion. The handwriting must be compared. He stood, a minor earthquake in mahogany, and went to the safe. Bring Miss Lacey here, he said as he retrieved a file. "Today, and bring the note. We shall have a demonstration." I made the call. Lacey agreed to come, nervous but cooperative, and arrived just after noon. Eyes red, hands tucked in her sleeves like she was hiding cuts. She sat stiffly on the edge of the red chair, glancing around the room like she expected a trapdoor to open under her. Wolfe didn't speak at first. He just handed her a pad and pen. "Miss Lacey, please write exactly this. Next time, the filling will be blood." She blinked. "Why?" "Because," he said, "I am determining whether you are a liar or merely a fool." That did it. Her shoulders squared, her chin rose, and she wrote the sentence quickly, then handed it back. I compared it to the original while Wolfe watched my face. "It's not a match," I said. "Different angle, different spacing. She's not our scribe." "Of course not," Wolfe said. Lacey looked more confused than relieved. "Miss Lacey," Wolfe continued, "you delivered several orders for the bakery last month. On any of those occasions, did Claire or anyone else ask you to drop off an envelope or note?" She shook her head. "No, I just brought food." "To private homes?" "Sometimes. Offices. A few apartments." "Anyone stand out?" She frowned. "There was one. Last week. It wasn't a pie order, though. Just a brown envelope. Claire said it was a contract." "Where?" "A building on 82nd Street. The man's name was Loring." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "Not Thomas Loring?" "I think so." "Why?" I spoke before Wolfe could. "Because Thomas Loring is the investor Claire's been trying to impress, the one Genevieve wouldn't sell to." Wolfe's eyes closed. "And there," he said, "is our ghostwriter." He opened them again and looked directly at me. "Arrange a meeting with Mr. Loring. I believe he knows far more about pastries than he lets on." I nodded, heading for the phone. The circle was closing fast now, and Wolfe, now fully alert, fully committed, was about to pinch it shut, because someone had needed this whole thing from the start. And now finally, we were about to see who'd been wearing the apron behind the curtain. By the time I got Thomas Loring on the phone, it was clear he was not a man who appreciated being surprised. His voice was deep, polished, and lacquered, with just enough civility to make the condescension slide off the edges. "This is highly irregular," he said after I gave him the briefest outline of Wolfe's request. "Sure," I replied. "So is threatening a woman with metaphorical pastry blood, but here we are." He didn't laugh or deny it, just said he could make time at 4, and only if it didn't take long. When I relayed that to Wolfe, he muttered something about men, with too much money and too little imagination, and went back to feeding his orchids, which, judging by the look he gave the note on his desk, were currently ranking higher in his estimation than most humans. At 3:50, Loring arrived. He wore a charcoal suit cut so sharp it could slice citrus, a crimson tie, and the expression of a man perpetually annoyed to find himself in the company of people he didn't pay. He was lean, deliberate, and carried himself like every room was already his. He introduced himself with the efficiency of a power handshake, and took the chair I offered with the faintest wrinkle of his nose, like the brownstone was tolerable, but not impressive. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, glancing over, "I understand you. Wanted to speak with me about a matter concerning Lodestar Bakery. I'd appreciate it if we could be efficient. My time is limited." Wolfe looked at him as if Loring were a recipe submitted to gourmet by a 9-year-old. "Mr. Loring," Wolfe said, "you have invested, directly or through intermediaries, in at least 3 boutique food businesses in the last 2 years. Lodestar was to be your 4th. "I was considering it," Loring replied, carefully neutral. "Miss Pike declined," Wolfe said, "and Miss Deming was eager. A conflict. You chose to influence it." Loring didn't blink. "I made no such move." "No? Then allow me to elaborate your conduct for you. You advised Claire Deming privately, encouraged her to steer the business into instability to force Genevieve's hand. You fed her doubts, perhaps even planted suggestions, sabotage as persuasion, not destruction. You saw Claire's anxiety and banked on it. "That's conjecture," Loring said, ice beginning to form behind his voice. "It's deduction," Wolfe said coldly, "but we'll move to something more tangible. You had a note delivered, by Miss Deming or someone she manipulated, to Miss Pike. A theatrical threat, sloppy in tone, transparent in intent, meant to push her to further unravel. You overplayed." "I did nothing of the kind." Wolfe leaned forward a quarter inch, more movement than he'd made in 2 hours. "Had the note's ink analyzed. Commercial ballpoint, fine tip. Sold in bulk to 4 vendors in Manhattan. One of them supplies executive gifts for your real estate firm." Loring's jaw clenched. "Not much, but enough. Anyone could have bought that pen." "Yes," Wolfe said, "but only one of them used it to write a message that matched in phrase and posture. An email you sent 6 months ago to a previous business partner. The phrasing is identical. You've left me no choice. Next time the gloves come off." And in this case the metaphor mutated into filling instead of gloves. I saw Loring's eyes flicker, a flash of fury, then calculation. He leaned back and crossed his legs. "You have no proof I wrote that note." "I don't require proof," Wolfe said. "I require knowledge. And I now know that your influence over Claire Deming extended well beyond advice. You manipulated her, and then you manipulated the narrative. You orchestrated the note to provoke Genevieve into further erratic action, likely hoping she'd withdraw or implode." Loring smiled thinly. "That's a story, but it isn't actionable." "No," Wolfe said, "it's not. You've committed no legal offense. But you have revealed yourself. Miss Pike will no longer tolerate your interest, and I will ensure that any future venture you pursue will be preceded by the record of this encounter." Quietly, efficiently, Loring stood. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're very good at this," he said. "I am," Wolfe replied. "I'll keep that in mind." And just like that he left. I followed him to the door and watched him disappear into the late afternoon light, his shoulders rigid, his stride clipped. The kind of man who hated losing more than most people hate bleeding. When I returned to the office, Wolfe was already reclining again, eyes closed, hands resting like settled dust. "Well," I said, "that was polite." "He's a virus," Wolfe murmured. "He mutates to survive, but he won't infect Lodestar again." "Do we tell Genevieve?" "She must be told, but not today." I nodded. "And Claire?" "She's already paid her price. She was used, then discarded." A fitting irony. That might have been it. Case wrapped, evil dodged, sanity restored, except for one final footnote. That arrived by way of a hesitant knock at the front door that evening. It was Lacey. She stood there in jeans and a faded hoodie, hands shoved in her pockets, face pale but determined. I let her in without asking. "I know who wrote the note," she said. I didn't interrupt. "It wasn't me, it wasn't Claire, it was Pilar." That caught me. "She asked me to copy it," Lacey said. "She said it was a joke," said Genevieve, "was being dramatic, and she wanted to shake her. I didn't think it was real, but when you started asking about handwriting, I panicked. I thought I'd be blamed." I guided her into the office and let Wolfe absorb her words without a single movement. Then slowly he opened his eyes. "Miss Pilar," he said, "had access, motive, and immunity. She was overlooked, as so many are." Lacey nodded. "She didn't like Genevieve, thought she was soft, said she wouldn't last, said she was ruining the bakery. And Miss Deming, she didn't know." Wolfe closed his eyes again. "She was another pawn. Pilar had vision. Claire had anxiety." "What do we do?" I asked. "Nothing," Wolfe said. "The truth is known. Miss Pilar will be removed, but not punished, not formally." "She threatened someone." "She bluffed," Wolfe said. She wrote a line she never intended to act on, and she failed. I showed Lacey out, gave her a word or two of thanks, and came back to the quiet. Wolfe reached for his Armagnac. "So," I said, "what's the moral this time?" He took a sip, then set the glass down. "Fear," he said, "makes excellent pastry. Layers upon layers. But truth is the filling. And if there's none inside, no matter how beautiful the crust, it is still hollow." I looked at the clock. "Dinner," he nodded once. "Tell Fritz no pies tonight." "Done." I paused at the doorway. "But tomorrow?" He allowed a rare smile. "Something sweet, with substance." The following morning came with a drizzle that tapped the windows like an impatient creditor. The brownstone, usually a fortress, against the chaos of Manhattan, felt quieter than usual, as though it too was pausing to digest the last course of truth. Wolfe stayed in his chair long past the breakfast hour, saying little, eyes half-lidded as he stared at nothing. You'd think he was meditating on orchids, not human deceit. I, on the other hand, had the clean-up shift. By 10 o'clock, I'd already called Genevieve Pike to deliver the full account. I kept it clean. Claire had been manipulated. The note had been written under false pretenses. The real instigator of that final dramatic twist had been Pilar, and the puppet master behind much of the storm was none other than Thomas Loring. She'd taken it with a kind of numb relief, like someone who hadn't realized how close they were to being swept out to sea until the lifeboat arrived. "I suppose I should fire Pilar," she said quietly. "That would be the responsible thing," I replied, "but not the easy one." "No," I admitted. "Firing someone always burns, even if they've been dousing the walls in gasoline." She didn't ask if she could come thank Wolfe in person. That I respected. She understood finally what most clients take weeks to learn. Gratitude was something Wolfe accepted in the form of checks, silence, and never darkening his doorway again. Claire sent a message later that day, a clipped email from a borrowed address. Her own had likely been retired in disgrace. It read, "I don't know if I should thank you or curse you, but at least now I can start over with both eyes open." C.D. Wolfe didn't even glance at it. "Good," he said. "May she build something edible next time." As for Lacey, she left the city 2 days later, back to Vermont, presumably to lick her wounds and bury the memory of being caught between her aunt's ambitions and a sabotage plot disguised as mentorship. I didn't press her on what else Pilar might have said or promised. Some things are better left with only the corner folded down. It was Pilar herself who surprised me next. She showed up unannounced on the 4th morning after the storm had passed, wearing her chef's jacket like armor, and her expression like she'd finally made peace with what was coming. I was alone in the front hall, sorting through a stack of Wolfe's mail, when the buzzer rattled me out of my rhythm. I opened the door expecting a delivery, maybe a new shipment of the rare Ugandan vanilla pods Wolfe had been fawning over. Instead, there she stood, umbrella dripping and eyes steady. "I'm here to speak to Mr. Wolfe," she said. "You're lucky I haven't invented an automatic rejection button," I muttered, but stepped aside. She didn't flinch as I led her to the office. Wolfe looked up as I announced her, his expression unreadable but not hostile. He gestured her in like she was a dish he didn't remember ordering. "I won't waste your time," Pilar said as she sat. "I wanted you to hear it from me. I wrote the note." "I know," Wolfe said. "I gave it to Lacey. Told her it was a joke." "That was a lie. I knew Genevieve would find it." Wolfe said nothing. "I did it because I thought the business deserved better. I thought she was weak. I was wrong." "You were arrogant," Wolfe said, his tone even, "and petty, but not wrong." That stopped her. "She was unprepared," Wolfe continued. "She led with sentiment and delayed with doubt. Your frustration was understandable. Your method was not." "I see that now." "Do you?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "Sabotage is not just unprofessional, It's a symptom of cowardice. You made yourself the judge of another's worth and delivered sentence behind their back. That is contemptible." Pilar swallowed. "Then you'll be glad to know I've resigned." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "I left my key on the counter," she said, "and I told Genevieve what I did, the full story, no edits." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "That is better than I expected." She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't wait for approval, just stood, nodded to me and left. Wolfe sat for a while afterward, gazing at the empty space she'd left behind as if watching a souffle collapse. "She'll land somewhere," he said eventually. "She's good," I said. "She's dangerous," Wolfe replied. "And dangerous people are always useful to someone." 2 hours later, Fritz delivered a custard tart with a browned meringue swirl on top. I raised an eyebrow. "From Genevieve," he said. No note. Wolfe gave it a single glance before shaking his head. "Take it to the kitchen. We'll serve it to Saul tomorrow. If it's poisoned, he'll notice before he swallows. Very generous of you. I'm in a forgiving mood." That I had to write down. The next few days were quiet. Wolfe retreated back into his books and broth. I handled the light casework, mostly. Background checks for clients too rich and paranoid to use Google, and Fritz polished the glass in the dining room until it gleamed like it remembered being fire. One evening, Wolfe called me into the office just after dinner. He had a brandy in hand, one finger pressed to the rim like a punctuation mark. "Archie," he said, "why did she send the tart?" "Genevieve?" "Yes." "She was grateful." "No," Wolfe said. "She was closing the loop, ending the story." "And?" "It was a poor gesture, too symbolic, too final." I leaned back. "You think she'll be back?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that she may one day remember what it felt like to deceive, even for justice, and realize how close she came to becoming the villain. And when she does, she will understand what I truly did for her." He took a sip of brandy. "And then she may send something worth eating," I chuckled. "That your idea of closure?" "No," Wolfe said. "It's my idea of progress." I sat there for a moment, watching the fire flicker low behind him. Outside, the rain had returned, gentler now, like the sky was wiping its face clean. The pie with no filling had been solved. But the people involved? They were still finding their centers. Wolfe reached for his book. I reached for my coat. And for the first time in days, the brownstone felt settled again, still, whole. 3 days after Wolfe declared the case settled, just as I'd begun to relax into the delusion that the only mystery we'd face that week would involve a misfiled orchid ledger, the doorbell rang. Not the polite clipped buzz of a client by appointment. This was the long press, the kind of ring that thinks it's more important than it is. I opened the door expecting a courier or maybe Saul Panzer returning the tart dish. Instead, standing there in a damp trench coat with a beige file folder clutched in both hands, was a man in his late 30s with thinning black hair, an anxious brow, and the look of someone who had just realized he'd been walking through his life with his shoes on the wrong feet. He held up the folder like a peace offering. "My name is Dennis Kent. I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe." "No one needs to speak with Mr. Wolfe," I said. "Most people merely survive it." That didn't seem to dissuade him. I could see it in his eyes. Whatever he was carrying in that folder had weight, and he'd decided, probably in a fit of panic, that we were the only place left to drop it. I showed him into the front room and buzzed Wolfe, who responded with his usual enthusiasm. For surprise visits, a grunt. "Mr. Wolfe," I said when I'd coaxed Kent into a chair and retrieved him a glass of water, "we have a visitor. He claims he's not here about a pie, but I wouldn't bet the rent." "I am not," Kent said quickly. "It's about Lodestar Bakery." That got Wolfe's attention. I saw it in the pause before his voice returned over the intercom. "Bring him?" Kent sat across from Wolfe with the folder on his knees. a man trying to will himself into composure. Wolfe glanced at him with the vague curiosity he reserved for new ingredients he didn't yet trust. "Explain," he said. Kent opened the folder and laid out half a dozen documents, typed contracts, annotated ledgers, and one rather battered envelope addressed to Claire Deming. "I work for Halbert Capital," he said. "One of our investment arms was quietly evaluating Lodestar before your investigation. I was handling the due diligence. I knew something was wrong. The numbers didn't line up, but Claire and Genevieve both insisted it was just growing pains." "Growing pains that included fraudulent figures?" I asked, eyeing the documents. Kent gave a twitch of a nod. Claire was moving funds, small amounts but steadily, into a separate account. Not stolen, just misreported. I confronted her about it. She said she needed the liquidity to convince an external partner, Thomas Loring, to bridge a short-term equipment deal. Said Genevieve didn't know. "She didn't," Wolfe said flatly. "No," Kent agreed. "I didn't think so either. I was waiting to take it to my director when your name showed up. Word spread fast, so I waited." "Why come now?" Wolfe asked. "Because something's wrong. I think Loring isn't done." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "Go on." "Last night," Kent said, "Claire called me. She sounded hollow. She said she'd been approached by a third party, anonymous, she said, who claimed to have documentation that would implicate Genevieve in the accounting discrepancies." I narrowed my eyes. "Blackmail?" "Not in the classic sense. More like coercion. The suggestion was that if Claire didn't stay quiet about her own part in the mess, someone would make it look like Genevieve was the one who initiated it." Wolfe frowned. "Someone is constructing a new narrative." "Yes," Kent said. "And I think Loring's behind it. I think he wants the business to collapse under Genevieve's name now, not Claire's. With her gone, the bakery loses its identity. It's easier to buy at a discount. Ruin an acquisition," Wolfe murmured. "Efficient, brutal." "But he's being subtle," Kent added. "He's using intermediaries, and Claire, I think she's scared." I looked at Wolfe, who was already forming the strategy behind his eyes. "He's pivoted," I said. "After being exposed, he's shifting the blame, creating a new villain to bring down Lodestar from within. Miss Pike will not fall for it," Wolfe said. "She might," I countered, "if the documents are convincing enough, if Claire panics and corroborates just enough to lend them credibility." "Then we must see the documents," Wolfe said. Kent nodded. "I don't have them, but Claire said she was meeting the courier this evening. A drop, not a conversation. 7 p.m. Bryant Park. Archie," Wolfe said, "go, observe. If possible, intercept. And if Loring has stooped to theatrical drops, I want to know how far the rot has spread." I left with Kent, who gave me the meet-up details, and promised to keep quiet until Wolfe gave the word. Bryant Park was busy enough in the evening to cover a discreet handoff, but quiet enough in pockets to make a man nervous. At 6:45, I stationed myself near the fountain, coat collar turned up, watching. Claire arrived 5 minutes later, wearing dark glasses and a nervous tic that kept her glancing over her shoulder. She sat on the edge of a bench with a folded newspaper in her lap, like we were auditioning for a Cold War spy movie. At precisely 7, a man in a tweed cap and grey overcoat walked past and dropped a thin envelope on the bench beside her, murmuring something I couldn't catch. Claire didn't speak, just waited a beat, then picked it up and left. I followed the delivery guy 4 blocks before he ducked into a deli and vanished out the back. Professional, not a random messenger. Someone used to avoiding tails. I went back to the brownstone and gave Wolfe the report. He nodded once and we waited. Claire called at 8:40. Wolfe took it in the office. I sat outside the door. After 10 minutes he called me in. "She received fabricated ledgers," he said. "Altered payroll, fictitious Transfers, fake invoices, all dated printed on bakery letterhead. She believe it. She doesn't want to, but fear has a strong flavor. You think Loring made them? Without doubt. Then what's the plan? Wolfe lifted a brow. We let him believe he succeeded. The next morning, Wolfe called Genevieve. He told her with remarkable delicacy that someone was attempting to forge a financial trail in her name. He told her to act shocked, but not too shocked, to let it reach Loring's ears through Claire. To pretend the business was reeling, leadership divided, and then, once he took the bait, Wolfe would spring his real trap. "You're enjoying this," I said when he hung up. "I am restoring balance," he replied. "But you hate theatre." "No," Wolfe said. "I hate bad theatre. This, Mr. Goodwin, will be a command performance." And judging by the way he leaned back, steepled his fingers, and finally allowed himself a small, rare smile, I knew something Wolfe rarely admitted. He wasn't just planning to stop Loring. He was planning to humiliate him, and I, for once, couldn't wait for the final act. It happened the following evening, just as Wolfe intended, with every piece of the game arranged on the board so neatly you could have laid out hors d'oeuvres between them. Claire arrived at the brownstone at 6 sharp, eyes still shadowed, nerves still on edge. She didn't ask questions when I took her coat and led her into the office. Loring followed 20 minutes later, self-invited, confident as a buzzard on a power line. His coat was sharp, his eyes sharper. When he stepped into the room and saw Claire already seated across from Wolfe, something in his expression flickered, but he didn't back down. Not Thomas Loring. Genevieve arrived last, with her hair pulled back and her jaw set like she'd finally decided she was done letting anyone else shape the narrative of her business. She didn't speak to Claire. Claire didn't look at her. The air had weight. Saul Panzer stood at the back wall like wallpaper, which meant he was twice as dangerous and 3 times as observant. Wolfe remained seated, of course, behind his desk, with his fingers steepled and his eyes half-lidded, like he was letting the silence rise before slicing into it. Then he spoke. "Miss Pike, Miss Deming, Mr. Loring, thank you for indulging my eccentricity. I dislike unresolved matters, particularly when they offend the principles of order and justice to which I grudgingly subscribe." Loring made a sound halfway between a laugh and a cough. "If this is about Claire's mistake, I think we've addressed that." "Silence," Wolfe said flatly. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You will have ample time to lie. Mr. Loring, let me first lay out what I know." He turned his gaze on Claire. "You were misled. You were told that short-term manipulation of funds, framed as a liquidity bridge, would help secure a deal. You were persuaded by a man who promised you control, independence, and a lucrative future. In your desperation, you committed acts that were foolish, but not criminal." Claire swallowed, but said nothing. "Then," Wolfe went on, "when your efforts failed, Mr. Loring attempted to rewrite the story. Fabricated ledgers, forged signatures, a planted narrative with Miss Pike as the architect of deception and you, Miss Deming, as the frightened accomplice. A new scandal in which he could swoop in, acquire the remains of the bakery and position himself as the savior." He turned to Genevieve. "He counted on your pride, on your silence. He miscalculated." Loring sat back, smiling just slightly. "That's a lot of drama for a bakery," Wolfe sighed. "Pfui, it is always drama for the thing men desire. Control, reputation, revenge, they rise in the flower." He tapped the envelope on his desk. "We obtained the courier's records. The man you used for the drop, Mr. Loring, is a professional intermediary, hired through a shell logistics firm your company once used in a proxy acquisition on West 58th. It took Mr. Panzer an afternoon to connect the dots, and the financial forgeries? Sloppy. They include payroll discrepancies referencing a staff member who had resigned 3 months prior. Loring opened his mouth, but Wolfe continued. Furthermore, the original source of the sabotage, the salted pies, the empty tarts, can now be firmly placed within a timeline orchestrated not by Miss Deming alone, but by pressure applied through your instructions and promises. That trail is less provable, but no less visible to the trained eye. Loring's smirk was gone now. He looked at Claire, then at Genevieve, and saw, finally, that neither one was playing defense anymore. So, what? He said softly. Do you want public humiliation? No, Wolfe said, merely your exit. Genevieve spoke for the first time. You'll surrender all interest in Lodestar, publicly. You'll sign the release Saul brought, and you'll remove your name, or any proxy's name, from our investor rolls. No lawsuits, no offers. You vanish. Claire added, and if you don't, we leak the forgeries. I'll testify. Genevieve will, Wolfe will, we bury you. Loring looked at them, then at Wolfe, whose gaze hadn't moved a millimeter. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a fountain pen, and signed the release. Good luck, he said. This city eats. I dreams for breakfast. Then it will find us undercooked, Genevieve replied. He left without another word. When the door clicked shut, Wolfe finally leaned back in his chair and exhaled, deeply, slowly, like a balloon letting out the last of its arrogance. Claire stood. I don't expect forgiveness. No, Wolfe said, you shouldn't, but I do expect improvement. Genevieve nodded at me, then at Wolfe. Thank you for clearing the air. I did not do it for gratitude, Wolfe said. I know, she said, but thank you anyway. They left together, Claire just a half step behind Genevieve, like maybe something between them hadn't shattered completely, just cracked and warped, waiting for time and humility to do the rest. I shut the door behind them and turned back to Wolfe. That was satisfying, I said. He reached for his beer, took a sip, and stared at the ceiling like it owed him something. I doubt Mr. Loring. We'll trouble them again, he said. But there are always others. The world is full of men who see women's work as opportunity. You think Genevieve will hold her own? I think she knows now what ambition looks like in the dark. Fritz arrived with dinner. Veal, roasted garlic, braised leeks, and the scent brought Wolfe fully back to earth. Dessert? I asked as I took my seat across from him. Wolfe glanced up. Apple tart. Simple, honest, with proper filling. I grinned. The kind you can trust. He didn't smile, but his eyes flicked toward the kitchen as if he were already tasting it. No deceit, he said. No flourishes, just truth in crust. And with that, the case of the pie with no filling was finally, fully done. Finished, with clarity, seasoned with justice, served at the precise temperature Wolfe required. And I'll admit it, the tart that night was perfect.